Hey guys, it's Timothy here. This is day 2 of Aether Revolt spoilers, and I will give a couple disclaimers here before I get into the cards. First thing, I've already recorded this once today, and the file got corrupted when it was converted, so if you see me breezing through a couple of the cards, it's because I've kind of already talked about it to myself, and I don't want to repeat too much. I got a couple other things to get done tonight, and it's already past midnight. Second thing, when we're looking at some of these cards, keep in mind that the new format is going to be Aether Revolt, Kaladesh in that order. So you only have one pack of Kaladesh. So if you see a card and you're like, wow, this really works with some other Kaladesh cards, keep in mind that there's only that one pack of Kaladesh coming around at the end of the draft. So you can't rely on a lot of Kaladesh cards, especially uncommons and rares, to come around to you. We're going to look at a good 20 or so cards. And we're going to start with Hungry Flames here. Last thing I'll say, and this is pertaining to spoiler season, I read on a Magic article today that apparently with small sets, they're now going to be doing preview season for only 1 week, whereas large sets are going to get 2 weeks. So that's why we're getting such a huge influx of cards. But there are a lot of really cool synergistic cards here, and I'm going to talk through them. I'd love to hear your opinions about them. But starting with Hungry Flames, a simple burn removal spell, 2 and a red for uncommon instant, 3 damage to target creature, 2 damage to target player. And it's as simple as that. This is a very solid card. 3 mana for 3 damage is good and limited, whether it's an instant or a sorcery. This is on the better side, being an instant, and also removing a creature, and on top of that, dealing damage to your opponent's face is fantastic. It's what you want to be doing with Bird. The same way you want your bears to do a little extra, you want your removal spells to do a little extra. And this is efficiently costed and an instant, so it's automatically, in my opinion, probably one of the best reds, one of the best red cards in this set. And yeah, it's a little early to say that, but look at the card, right? It's a tried and true formula that works for burn spells, and it works here too. So very, very strong card. Uncommon is probably a good spot for it too. Moving on, we'll see a couple more legendary creatures today, starting with Rishkar Pima Renegade, 2 and a green for a 2/2 legendary elf druid. It is a rare. When it enters the battlefield, you may put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, and each creature you control with a counter on it, any type of counter on it, has tap to add green to your mana pool. So this does a lot. First off, the worst case scenario is that you play this on turn 3, having not played anything else that turn, and it's a 3/3 that taps for green for 3 mana, which is already a fantastic card. The best case scenario is that you get to put a counter on 2 creatures, whether it's this and something else, or 2 other creatures, and now you're able to accelerate ahead 2 mana, and you can even get better than that, where creatures that already have 1/1 counters on them, or creatures that gain 1/1 counters after you play Rishkar, now tap for green, so you're able to accelerate your mana by quite a bit. A couple things with this card. It's deceptively powerful. You may look at this and think, yeah, that's a good card. No, this is a very, very good card. Extremely good on curve and good in the late game too, boosting up anything, and it works very well with cards like Kujar Seed Sculptor and things that can generate their own +1/+1 counters. Second off, you can potentially play a 6-drop on turn 4 with this. And that's not even like inconceivable. This just lets you do that. And then third off, I'll mention this before moving on because we'll see it again. There is that +1/+1 counter theme that green-black kind of solidified in Kaladesh. That's very apparent here, and it's even a little more fleshed out. I think a lot of the green and black cards in this set are geared towards the +1/+1 counter theme, so there will be a lot of synergy with Kaladesh as far as that's concerned. This is an automatic first pick in my book. I think it's probably better than, or will be better than most uncommons in this set, or at least tied for some of the best uncommons. It is a very, very strong card, and I would be very happy to pull it first pick. We're going to move along here, looking at a weaker version of kind of the same idea here. We have Greenbelt Druid. It's just a 1/3 for 2 mana that taps for green. It is an elf druid. It is a common. And again, this is like a tried and true formula here. A 2-drop that accelerates your mana ahead is a very good card. Whether it's green, whether it's colorless. If this tapped for colorless, it would still be a fantastic card. Same as Servant of the Conduit. And yes, Conduit is a much better mana dork than this is for the same mana cost. But this one is very reliable. It doesn't need the energy, and it just does what you want to do anyway, right? And regardless of what combination of colors you're playing with green, it lets you play your 4-drop a turn early or your 5 or 6-drop a turn early. Not as good as Rishkar, obviously, but this is a common, and these cards usually end up being the best green best commons in their color. Think cards like Hedron Crawler and Golden Hind and Leaf Gilder, to name a few from the last couple of sets that have been out. They're always very good, and I see no reason to think this one should be any worse. It really doesn't matter what the stats are, but a 1/3 also blocks pretty nice, which is decent. So I'm trying to click some things. This may not go super smoothly. I have a lot of files uploading right now, but looking at Release the Gremlins here, it's red and double X for a rare sorcery that says destroy X target artifacts, create X 2/2 red gremlin creature tokens. Now, this is very good main deckable artifact removal. And if you look at Kaladesh, red had, I believe, Ruinous Gremlins and Demolish as their only way to deal with artifacts, and neither of those are good cards. Ruinous Gremlin is okay at best, and Demolish is just not even good sideboard card when you have to bring it in. It's a begrudging sideboard card if you have literally nothing else to deal with certain artifacts. This is a good card. It's looking like there's going to be a lot more artifacts in Aether Revolt than Kaladesh, which is surprising given that Fabricate's not returning, and also given that Kaladesh was already an artifact-themed set. But there are a lot more kind of synergies with artifacts and a lot more things that incentivize you to have artifacts in Aether Revolt, especially with like Improvise being a main mechanic, that I could see this being a very strong main deckable card. Now, the downside, of course, is that if your opponent doesn't have any artifacts, the card doesn't do anything unless you're blowing up your own artifacts. Also, you cannot cast the card unless there are artifacts to destroy. So I heard someone mention, well, the worst case scenario, you pay red and you get a 2/2 gremlin. That's not true, actually. You can't pay 0 for X because or you can't pay 0 for X. You can and destroy 0 things and create 0 tokens. That doesn't do anything for you. So yeah, you can pay 0 for X, but it doesn't do anything. You have to pay at least 1 for X to get any gremlins off of it, obviously, the way it's worded. But think about it. 3 mana, destroy an opponent's artifact, make a 2/2 is a strong card. And then it scales even higher than that, getting stronger and stronger the later the game goes. 5 mana. Think of a 5 mana creature that said a 4/4 for 5 that said destroy 2 artifacts when it comes into play. That's essentially what you're looking at here, even though the damage is more spread out, or the creature power and toughness is spread out between tokens. That's not necessarily a bad thing either. So very strong card. I'd be happy to main deck this. It's not the type of card that I'm actively like hoping I open. No rhyme intended there, but it's a card I'm very happy to have if I'm playing red. And you know, it's not a card any non-red player wants, so you could see this being passed to you quite often. All right, this card is just incredible for limited. Game finisher if ever I've seen one. Aetherwind Vasker is 4 and 3 green for a 7/7 mythic lizard with trample, and that trample is key here. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you get an energy for each creature you control, and then you may also pay an energy to give it +1/+1 till end of turn. The combination of trample, all 3 of the abilities here combine to make this super powerful late game, just game finisher, right? So it starts off with a very strong body, and we've already seen green has a couple ways to accelerate your mana here across all rarities. Common, uncommon with Servant of the Conduit, rare with the Rishkar or whatever it is. If you can accelerate this out like any amount of turns early, it's fantastic. And even if you play it on turn 7, it should still be enough to win you the game if it doesn't get removed right away. So think about it. If you have, I don't know, let's just pick 2. If you have 2 creatures on the battlefield when you play this guy, you're getting 3 energy for an ETB trigger. You're getting another 3 energy when it attacks on the following turn. And then you have 6 energy plus any energy you've managed to save up. And you can dump as much of that as you want into this guy. And he has trample, which is just going to let him get through. No chump block in this guy. This is what I think Electrostatic Pummeler wants to be, right? Pummeler, yeah, can win a game, but I don't think Pummeler's a good card. It doesn't have trample. It's really hard to get it through, and you need to play bad cards like Larger Than Life to make it really work. and sometimes it doesn't pan out if you don't draw the cards the right way. This guy does everything he wants. He has trample himself, so no need for some weird combat trick to get through. He supplies his own energy and quite a bit of it, and he has his own pump ability, so he does everything you want to finish the game. And if your opponent doesn't remove this, it will kill them. Like, what are they going to do? It just deals so much damage, and I kind of used a low case scenario of only having 2 creatures. Imagine if you have like 5 creatures. You're in a big board stall when you play this. You get 5 energy, you attack, get 5 more, you can pump it +10/+10. You know, it's going to be very hard to deal with that without just using a straight up removal spell. So keep this in mind, that you will see games end when somebody plays this card. Also, I think foils of this card would look fantastic. Just a side thought there. Moving along, we have I can't remember the name off the top of my head, and it might take a second to load here. But we've got a rare land, Industrial Tower, I guess, that taps for colorless, or you can pay a life and tap it for any color of mana, but you can only do that if you control an artifact, which obviously shouldn't be that hard to pull off here. It does have a failsafe in that it still taps for colorless, which is nice, and basically turns into City of Brass, which is good. Now, with that being said, if you're in a competitive setting and you're drafting to win, maybe you're in the top 8 of like a GPT, or you're actually at a big tournament or something like that, you don't first pick this card. This is the type of card that you're happy to pick up a little later in the pack if you know that you need mana fixing, or you have some really awesome splash that you'd like to fit into your deck. And then it becomes an actively good card, right? That being, like, you just don't pick this up. It's very rare that in a competitive setting you would start your draft off with a dual land and be really happy with it, because you don't know if you're going to play those colors. You don't even know if you're going to splash. But you're happy to pick up a dual land once you know you're in those colors. And that's the competitive scene, of course. So if you're just, drafting for value or something like that, then you're really happy to pick this up. And personally, my draft style, when I get to the point where I understand a format a little better and I like to just have fun, I like to draft as many colors as I can and play all the gold cards. And Kaladesh had some sweet gold cards, and so does this set. So this is a card I'm happy is in the set. It does show us that there is going to be a little bit more mana fixing, and we will see even more of that by the end of this video. So I'm happy to see that, because Kaladesh was a little skimpy on the mana fixing and made it hard to play multiple colors if you weren't base green. Moving along, very interesting card. This is a card that's on my radar as something I want to kind of see how it plays out. But Inspirational Monuments is a 3-mana artifact that says your non-artifact spells have improvise, or whenever you cast a non-artifact spell, it has improvise or gains improvise, or however it's worded, which means that whenever you cast a spell that's not an artifact, you can tap any number of artifacts you control to reduce the cost of that spell by 1. So essentially on its own, this functions as a mana rock for your non-artifact spells, because you can tap it itself. You can tap the Inspirational Monuments to help pay an improvise cost. And hopefully you have other artifacts going on. Now, there's a weird balance here. If you're in a heavy artifact deck where this card is really good, then you actually have less spells that this works on, because it doesn't work on artifacts. And the contrary is true too. If you have a deck that doesn't have a lot of artifacts in it, then the spell's a little bit worse, because you're not going to be able to improvise as much, right? But at the very worst, this functions as a mana rock that has the potential to be much more, and that's something to be on the lookout for. I don't know that there's an improvised deck really, and a lot of these cards already have improvise, and improvise doesn't stack or anything like that. So I'd be interested to see how this card plays out. If you have 2 artifacts on board and you can make, just essentially have a Soul Ring on board with artifacts that don't do anything else, that's fine. That's a good card, right? Even at 3 mana, getting essentially 2 extra mana for tapping things that aren't really doing anything else seems good to me. But it does kind of have the potential to be kind of a bust card that doesn't really do anything, depending on how your deck is constructed. And I do see there being some decks in this format that are majority artifacts or very heavy artifacts, and then that card gets a little bit worse, I think, since you can't really use improvise to help you cast artifact spells. Moving on, we have another expertise, Rishkar's expertise. So I guess this is a full cycle here. We've seen Yahenni's expertise, we've seen Sram's expertise, and now Rishkar's expertise. This one is 4 and double green for a rare sorcery. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost, excuse me. This seems extremely powerful to me. Normally when green gets these really expensive draw cards that are like sorceries and instants, they don't play out very well. I'm thinking of a card like Nissa's Revelation from Magic Origins, just not a card I'm impressed with for its mana cost. What this does is it mitigates kind of taking a whole turn off to draw cards by also letting you then cast a card, and you draw before you cast. So it's pretty strong, in line with the other expertise, which are very strong cards too. This one's more expensive, but it also lets you cast a more expensive card for free in a color where that card is probably going to be super relevant, like a strong creature or something like that. And yes, there's a situation in which you're in top deck mode, you're stalled out. There's just no creatures on board. You draw this, it doesn't do anything, but at some point it will be a very strong card. And imagine like your strongest creature is 2 power, just to lowball it to see like how strong this card is. If you have a 2 power creature on board as your strongest creature, then you draw 2 cards and you get to cast something mana cost 5 or less from your hand. So you're getting like somewhere around like 8 to 10 mana's worth of cards or worth of effects out of just 6 mana. And that's what these expertises do. They let you kind of cheat on mana a little bit by getting more than your mana's worth of abilities. And that was just a 2 power creature. In green, it's not too hard to conceive of a situation where you have like a 4 power or 6 power creature on board. You draw a ton of cards and get to slam something else, which makes this almost a borderline bomb depending on what's in your deck. A good example, play Riparian Tiger on turn 5, swing 6 power. If it doesn't die, draw 6 and put another card on the battlefield. How do you lose that game, right? So this strikes me as something that's extremely powerful, and when I rate it, I'll probably rate it pretty highly. I do think the power level is there to justify it. And moving straight from that into kind of a wonky combo piece, I think. Aegis Automaton is 2 mana for a 0/3 common construct artifact creature, obviously. For 4 and a white, you can return another target creature you control to its owner's hand. So very similar to what Decoction Module is supposed to do. Keep in mind, Decoction Module is uncommon and from Kaladesh, so you may not rely on getting that sort of effect if that's what you want. I'm assuming the ability is here to kind of work with Revolt. And remember, Revolt cards trigger when or Revolt cards get an extra bonus if a permanent of yours has left the battlefield that turn. But the activation cost is so high and the body is just not very relevant after a certain point in the game that I can't see playing this card very often. I think the decks that want this sort of effect will put this card in there, but there are probably cards that do it better. So I'm not impressed with the Automaton overall. And I don't think there's very much else to say about it. It's a very, very low card in my book. Moving on, we have something from the Cal. I can't remember the name. It'll pop up. Aid from the Cal is 3 and double green for an enchantment with Revolt. And the whole thing is Revolt. So it triggers on your end step if a permanent left your side of the battlefield that turn. If that didn't happen, it doesn't do anything at all. So keep that in mind. But what it does is if Revolt is achieved by the end of your turn, on your end step, you get to reveal the top card of your library. If it's a permanent, you put it on the battlefield. If it's anything else, you put it on the bottom of your library. So this is free card advantage if you can continuously activate Revolt. This has a very low ceiling. This is one of those cards that it's kind of in the middle because it has a very high ceiling, but it also has a very low floor, with the floor being that it doesn't do anything at all. If you're not able to consistently trigger Revolt, it doesn't do anything. Keep in mind that it only triggers on your end step, and one way to get Revolt to trigger is have a creature die in combat. So if your opponent's attacking you and you're making blocks and trading creatures, that's not going to do it. You have to do it on your turn somehow. Thankfully, green has a couple ways to do this, and there are colorless cards that do it as well. But the ceiling is also really high, and I think the card's somewhere in between there for overall power level. It is the type of rare that people look at and they think best case scenario, well, I'm always going to be getting permanents off of this. I'll just put a bunch of creatures in my deck. But you have to have a way to abuse it, or at least a way to consistently activate it. So for right now, it's the type of card that could go either way for me, but it's right in the middle for me. A card that I think I'll play once or twice until I've either come up with a mind about either it's not very good or it's actually extremely good. So we'll see. Depends on what kind of support there is to consistently trigger Revolt, right? And speaking of which, we're going to look at Renegade map here. A 1 mana artifact, and that is crucial here. One thing I said yesterday, or in the first batch of spoilers, that I'll say again here is when you're looking at Revolt cards, you want a very, very cheap way to get a permanent to leave your side of the battlefield, because most of the Revolt cards are things that require you to pay mana, and you can't really combo with them if you already have to pay a bunch of mana for some other effect to get Revolt to trigger, like the Aegis Automaton. It's not realistic to be able to pay 5 mana to bounce something, have Revolt conditions satisfied, and then play something else to get the Revolt. Or by the point in the game where you're able to do that with like 7 mana, the card you're revolting is a little bit less relevant. So Renegade map, 1 mana for a common artifact that comes into the battlefield tapped. You may tap it and sack it to search your library for a basic land, reveal it, put it into your hand, shuffle your library. Very simple effect, but this card is very, very good at what it does. The main thing it does, besides just being an artifact for those synergies, is it helps you do Revolt very, very easily. It has no activation cost, so you have to skip a turn essentially in order to get it to do it. But it's a way to get a permanent to leave your side of the battlefield without any sort of investment, right? So we saw some really cheap Revolt creatures. For instance, the rare yesterday, it was an elf. It was a 2/1 for 1 and a green, and if Revolt was satisfied when it entered the battlefield, it would get 2+1/+1 counter. So essentially a 2 mana 4/3, but it's kind of hard to get that to happen on turn 2 without a card like Renegade map. So you play map on turn 1 ideally, and on turn 2 you sack it and you get to play something like that elf, and you're way, way ahead of the curve. You get to basically cheat out a 4/3 on turn 2, which is going to get a lot of damage in, or at least trade for a bunch of creatures. And this is even better than that. A couple other things it does besides helping Revolt out is it fixes your mana, which is very, very nice. In Kaladesh, like I mentioned, there wasn't a lot of ways to fix your mana outside of just being in green, or you had to get a Prophetic Prism or something like that. Second off, it is an artifact, so if you don't need to sack it right away for a land, you can use it to improvise, or you can use it to satisfy the condition of just controlling an artifact for some other card, like, I don't know, Underhanded Design, something along those lines. But I think this is a Revolt piece or a splash piece at its best. And I will say about this, I know it's a common, I'm probably spending a lot of time talking about it, but mark my words on this. This is the type of card, just like Prophetic Prism, just like Terrarion in Eldritch Moon, this is the type of card that when you draft Aether Revolt, maybe the first 2-3 weeks that you draft it, you'll see it wheeling around the table. People aren't going to catch on about how good it is and what it does. And then around the time people are getting familiar with the format, they're starting to learn what's good and what's not. This is the type of card that never wheels, just like Prophetic Prism, the type of card that goes way, way up in people's minds because it lets you splash these sweet cards. It lets you kind of smooth your draw out, make sure you're hitting a land, trigger your Revolt. It does so much, right? So I would expect this to be a very, very high pick on a lot of people's lists because of how flexible it is and how many different things it enables. Splash in, Revolt, Artifact, Synergies, Improvise. It does a lot, and it does that for an initial investment of 1 mana, which is great. So interested to see if I'm right about that. I could be completely wrong, but I have a suspicion. All right, enough about Renegade map, right? Countless Gears Renegade is 1 and a white for a 2/2 Dwarf Artificer, common, with Revolt. So keep in mind, cards like the map we just saw. When Countless Gears Renegade enters the battlefield, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, create countless colorless servo artifact creature tokens. And by that I mean you get 1 servo token. So by countless they mean 1, of course. This is 1 Gear Renegade. Pretty cool card. It's a bear at its very worst, and bears were not at their best in Kaladesh because of how super aggressive the format could be and how many like 3/3s and 3/2s and 2/3s there were. It made the 2/2 a little bit worse. But I think they're going to be a little bit better this time around because there are a lot more of them. And I think the format's going to slow down a little bit, but that's conversation for another time. This card's fine. It's a bear with a little bit of upside if you can get Revolt to trigger. That's going to be a little hard to do on turn 2, again, unless you have that map on turn 1 and you're willing to get rid of it right away. And the upside here isn't super crazy. Like, you get a 1/1, you get a total power of 3, a total of 3 power and toughness for 2 mana, which is a great rate. So pretty good card. I don't like the name. And one thing I will say about this, about the Revolt mechanic in general, as far as it pertains to creatures, is it works very nicely with blink effects. So if you think of a card like Acrobatic Maneuver, which removes a creature from the battlefield and then immediately puts it back on the battlefield, the creature comes back in and the Revolt condition will be satisfied. So if you play maneuvers on a card like Countless Gears Renegade, it comes back with his little buddy, which is pretty nice. And that's got me thinking, like, maybe Eldrazi Displacer has a really cool combo that we can figure out for Standard with Revolt, but that remains to be seen as well. That is actually relevant for this next card here, which is Aether Geode Miner, 1 and a white for a rare Dwarf Scout. It is a 3/1, and when it attacks, you get 2 energy. You may also pay 2 energy to exile it and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So a little bit of a gimmicky card. It has that aggressive feel to it. A 3/1 for 2 and white is nothing new. It's the type of card that if your opponent doesn't play a 2-drop and you're on the play, you just get to slam in for 3, maybe 6 damage before it goes checked at all. And it has a kind of pseudo-protection ability where you can attack with it, you get your energy, and then you see what your opponent does. They either say block or they don't block, right? And you kind of test them. And if they do block, you have that option to either trade it off or pay the energy to blink it and put it back in the battlefield and make it safe. It's kind of like those Gust Cloak creatures from way back when, where you could remove them from combat if they were blocked. So, you know, it's kind of like a skill check on your opponent. But the other thing this does really nicely is it enables Revolt, right? You attack with it, you blink it whether you have to or not, and you fulfill the condition of having a creature leave the battlefield for the turn, and then it comes back in. I will say this card seems good, but it doesn't seem like a rare. I don't think there's ever going to be a point where I just want to sit down in an Aether Revolt draft and open this as my pack one pick one. It doesn't seem that strong to me, but it does seem like a solid card at the very least, and it does push you in kind of an aggressive like white base build. It is the type of card too that, like, if there is a Revolt deck, this is kind of the rare you're looking for, but not really a card that I think is justified as a rare, not super powerful. And I'll probably say the same for this next card here, even though this one has a lot of potential too. Glint Sleeve Siphoner is 1 and a black for a 2/1 human rogue, rare as well. It has Menace. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you get an energy. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 2 energy. If you do, you draw a card and lose a life. So very, very similar to a lot of cards we've seen recently. Blood Scrivener, Asylum Visitor, things like that, right? And there's a lot going on here. So first off, it's a pretty aggressive creature. A 2-mana bear with Menace is probably going to get in there. It is a lot better on the play than it is on the draw. On the play, it's almost guaranteed to get at least 1 swing in, and that fulfills the 2 energy you need to trigger the ability, which is sweet. On the play, it's a little bit worse because your opponent could go 2-drop, 3-drop, and just be able to block and kill it. Most of the time. It only makes 1 energy on attacks, but it also gives you 1 when it enters the battlefield. So the first time it attacks, you're up to at least 2 energy off of just this card alone. Now what it does on the upkeep is pretty interesting. You can't abuse it. It's not like you can pay multiples of 2 energy and just draw cards and lose life. It doesn't work that way because it's a triggered ability. So you get 1 card, you lose a life for 2 energy. And it is a May ability. You don't have to do that. The thing is, though, if you ever draw a card from this guy, it's already justified its spot. It's gotten some sort of damage in there. It's replaced itself with the card it's drawn. Yeah, you maybe lost 1 or 2 life, but it does have card advantage. And the reason I think this one's a rare and probably shouldn't be an uncommon is because in the course of a game, if you have other ways to generate energy than besides this guy just getting in there and attacking, then this guy is going to draw you extra cards every turn until your opponent deals with it. So maybe a rare is the right spot for this one. A little better than the last guy I saw. No, he's not bad. I'm not saying he's bad. All right, moving along pretty swiftly here. This one's cool. Check this one out. So Mechanized Production, 2 and double blue, 4 mana total for a Mythic Aura so it's not going to come up in your games very often. When you do get to play with it, it might be interesting to figure out how to play with it. You enchant an artifact you control, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you get a token that's a copy of that enchanted artifact. And then if you control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as another artifact you control, as one another, you win the game. So alternate win con, and actually a conceivable win off of this alternate win con. So rest aside that you may have multiples of a single artifact in your deck. If you can play a very controlling game, if blue is supported in a way where you can actually control your opponent's ability to interact with the artifact you have this on, I could see this just winning the game over the course of 7-8 turns by making duplicates of whatever artifact you put it on. You can't put this on a creature, but if that creature is an artifact, you can slam it on there and just get advantage that way. Think about this card on something like Panharmonicon or Aetherflux Reservoir, where you just get to go nuts, you get to go crazy, or Aetherworks Marvel. Just like crazy stuff happening, right? A couple other things to mention here. Yes, this triggers off tokens, so I think the most frequent way this will win the game is you just have 8 Thopters or you have 8 Servos and you win. It's not too hard to do that, right? It's pretty easy to make Servos, probably a little less easy now. And maybe, Thopters are a little bit harder, but, your Whirler Maker deck or something. I don't know. And the last thing to mention is that the artifact you enchant doesn't necessarily have to be the artifact that it counts up. You just have to have any artifact in multiple of 8 to win the game. It doesn't have to be the artifact that you necessarily enchanted with this. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. I think the best way to use this is put it on something that is protected. Put it on something that is just some sort of card advantage. Like if you put this on a Prophetic Prism, you draw a card every turn, right? That's not bad. Maybe some sort of mana producing artifact or something. I don't know, but it has a lot of potential if you can protect the card you put it on. And keep in mind, if you put it on an artifact creature, it's more vulnerable, so maybe that's not the best line to go if you're actually trying to win with this. But it's like a followed footsteps type enchantment that gives you a lot of advantage over the course of a couple turns if you can get it to stick around and get it to reliably work. The next card here, I'm going to kind of rave about this one. I think this is incredibly strong, and I think people are underselling it. I haven't really looked at people's comments on this one, but I have a feeling it's the type of card that might go under some people's radar. So first off, the card is Reverse Engineer. It's 3 and double blue for a sorcery at uncommon with Improvise, and you draw 3 cards. So you can reduce the cost of this by 1 colorless for each artifact you tap while casting it. And best case scenario, 2 blue, draw 3 cards. Like, that is amazing. That's fantastic. It doesn't get much better than that for a limited card. Keep in mind, this is an uncommon. Yes, it's a sorcery, and we start with the 4. Is this a playable card if I can't reduce the cost at all? Well, 5 mana, draw 3 cards is okay. It's not good against aggressive decks, but sometimes it's fine. Tezzeret's Ambition is not a particularly great card in Kaladesh, and this is better than Tezzeret's Ambition for the same mana cost and the same kind of overall effect. That Improvise is key, though, here. Like, if you reduce this by 1, that's not hard to conceive of. By turn 5 or turn 4, when you're ready to play this card, if you can reduce this by 1, you're casting Harmonize, and Harmonize is a fantastic limited card. If you're not under a lot of pressure and you can afford to take a turn to cast a draw spell, that's exactly what you're looking for, right? If you can reduce this by 2, and that's not inconceivable either, you have a better Divination for the same mana cost as Divination, and then you have that best case scenario of 2 blue, draw 3 cards, which still isn't like inconceivable. It will come up sometimes. When you're looking at this card, think about Gearseeker Serpent and how many times you've seen Gearseeker Serpent cast for 2, 3, 4, 5 mana, which makes it a very, very good card. Keep in mind, Gearseeker Serpent was the best blue common in Kaladesh. Like, no, hands down, in my opinion, best blue common. And I see the same kind of thing here with just a busted draw spell that people they say 5, draw 3, Well, it's not going to be that most of the time. I would say at least 75% of the time, this is going to cost less than 5. And that other 25% of the time when you have to pay 5 mana to draw 3, that's fine too. So I think this card is fantastic, and I would not undersell it. I really do. I think the card is very strong, and I think it could have been a rare. As far as rare draw spells go, it doesn't get much better than stuff like that. For limited purposes, at least. All right, wrapping up here, we got Yahenni here. We've got 3 gold cards, and then just a couple cards that came out after midnight today. Yahenni, I guess, Undying Partisan is 2 in black for a 2/2 legendary Aetherborn vampire. Story reasons, I don't know. Read the story. It is a rare. It has haste. It says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a 1/1 counter on it, and you may sacrifice another creature to give it indestructible for the turn. So a good combination of abilities here. It grows as the game goes on and your opponent's creatures die. It lets you kind of protect itself with the indestructible clause, and it is a free sack engine, and that's pretty huge. I don't know if there's anything to abuse with a free sacrifice engine, but if you're playing this in your animation module deck, and this card combos very well with animation module, then you can protect Yahenni pretty well. Haste isn't the most relevant keyword on a card like this. A 3-mana 2/2 with haste is kind of whatever, really. It's not very often that you'll be able to play this and then also have mana to play a removal spell to kill an opponent's creature, make Yahenni bigger, and then attack with it that turn. A lot of times this will just come down on turn 3, and it will hope to sit there and grow bigger throughout the course of a game, and it threatens that activation if your opponent wants to use removal on it. The problem is this card asks for a lot to be going in the right direction. You want to have creatures that you're willing to sacrifice. You're not just going to sack all of your other creatures in the deck to this, unless you know it's going to win you the game. And second, your opponent has to have creatures that are dying, so you have to have kind of favorable combats here that don't involve Yahenni dying. And that has to go on throughout the course of the game, right? If this ever gets just 1 counter, it's, decent, but as is, it needs a little bit of work to really meet the bar. But I think the combination of abilities here is enough to justify Yahenni. And last thing about it, because, it's a pretty solid card. Well, 2 things about it. First things first, it supports that black-green +1/+1 counter theme I was talking about with Rishkar. And second, it is a free sacrifice engine for the purposes of Standard, which, Nantuka Husk's not around anymore. So if you need a free sacrifice engine, there you go. You got Yahenni. Yeah, whatever. Seems cool. It's a vampire, too. All right, moving on to gold cards. Gold cards are my favorite. Tezzeret's Touch. 1 blue and black for an uncommon enchantment. Enchant an artifact. The artifact is a creature with base power and toughness 5/5 in addition to its other types. And when the enchanted artifact is put in a graveyard, return it to your hand. Return that artifact to your hand, not Tezzeret's Touch. But this is pretty strong. It's very close to, in Soul Artifact down here, which was in M15. It was 2 mana, make a dude of 5/5. And keep in mind, Ornithopter was in that set, and Ornithopter is in this set. And there were games where you play Ornithopter on turn 0 or 1, or turn 1, and you just in Soul Artifact it, and suddenly you have a 5/5 flyer. When you change the creature's power and toughness, or you make the artifact a 5/5, you're not getting rid of its abilities or anything. So if you put this on an Ornithopter, it still flies, and a 5/5 flyer on turn 3, swinging on turn 3, is a little hard to beat. And this is even better in that it kind of mitigates its own problem with auras. I mention this almost every time we see an aura. When you open yourself up for a 2-for-1, your opponent kills the creature, you lose the aura and the creature, your opponent just 2-for-1 you, and they're really happy. You get that card back. And that helps to mitigate it. So your opponent's really only getting a 1-for-1, or you can call it like a 1.5-for-1 or something like that, since it goes to your hand. But this is pretty strong, and I can see games ending with this pretty quickly. Two more things to say about it. First off, it interacts very nicely with vehicles. Imagine you play your Smuggler's Copter on turn 2 because you're lucky and got a Smuggler's Copter. I don't know, your Sky Skiff, whatever. And then you get to just slap this on it. You no longer have to crew that vehicle. This turns it into a creature for you, so it doesn't need to crew to become a creature. Same thing that I mentioned with the actual Tezzeret Planeswalker in this set. His ability to turn creatures into 5/5s, which is the same thing this card does, mitigates the downside of those like really prohibitive crew costs, even though it does modify the power and toughness of the card. So it becomes a 5/5 no matter what it was, which could be a benefit or a downside if you're crewing something that's way, way bigger than 5/5. But yeah, it works really nicely with vehicles. And then last thing, as strong as this card is, you probably won't play it very often because I wouldn't recommend first picking a card like this unless you have a pretty weak pack. It's not the type of gold card I want to start my draft out with because I don't know, it's a little off-putting as strong as it is to start the draft with. And also on that notion, like sometimes you might have a sweet vehicle deck or you might have a sweet artifact deck, but you're not blue-black. So you get past this card, and as good as the card would be in your deck, you just have to pass it along. So the two colors does hurt it a little bit, whereas like in Soul Artifact, you're just like blue deck, boom, slam. In Soul Artifact. But when you do get to play it, I think it'll work out very nicely, and you probably won't be afraid to slam it on creatures. Keep in mind, if you cast it on an artifact and they remove that artifact in response, you don't get it back. So be careful when you cast it. You do want it to at least stick. Having it removed in response is pretty tough. Moving on, Rogue Refiner, that's just the translation here, is 1 green and blue for a 3/2 human rogue. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card and gain 2 energy. Obviously, when you look at a set, or more recently when you look at a set and you see a gold uncommon, it tells you what that color is trying to do. And this is very clearly telling you green-blue, play energy, make that energy work with something, and that's pretty consistent with Kaladesh. I think green and blue were the best color combinations to really take advantage of energy, and this card shows it's a 3/2 for 3, which is great. That replaces itself with an enter the battlefield trigger. Even if you're not using energy, this is just a good card as is, and I would play it every time I'm able to without stretching the color so much. So not much to say about it. It is a solid card, and yeah. All right, and then next we have Renegade Rallier. Really sweet card. We're going to go through all the intricacies of this card real quick, but our Selesnya gold uncommon for the set is 1 green and a white for a 3/2. Same stats as the last guy we just saw. An uncommon human warrior with Revolt. And it says, when he enters the battlefield, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, return target permanent with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So kind of a small restriction on it, 2 or less, but still value nonetheless. Now, let's kind of work through it. Let's say you just have to play this on turn 3. It's a 3/2 for 3, not the best, but still decent. It might have to trade for a 2-drop, but it's still going to trade for something, right? And then it gets a little bit better than that, right? Gets a little bit better than that. So let's say on turn 2 you play a 2-drop. Or I don't know. You played on turn 3, you had something leave the battlefield, you get something back, right? And then you take it up a notch. You played a 2-drop on turn 2, your opponent played a 2-drop. Turn 3, you slam your 2-drop into theirs, they block, you trade them off. Well, haha, I have this guy. I play him, I get my 2-drop back because of the Revolt trigger. And then you can notch it up one more step, right? Because if you fulfill Revolt, you fulfill Revolt for the entire turn. So the best case scenario here is you do something on turn 2 where you trade a creature off, hopefully a Revolt creature, and then you play this guy. Since you had a permanent leave the battlefield in combat, he gets that Revolt creature back, like the Countless Gearsmith or whatever it's called. Then that guy comes in, Revolt's still active for the turn, he gets to go off, and you just get to do some crazy stuff, right? So a lot of combo potential in this card, and the type of card that you have to keep in mind exists in the format. If your opponent is green-white, and they're making a really weird attack, or they're just trading when maybe they shouldn't be, you have to keep in mind, oh, maybe they're trying to get their creature to die so that they can trigger Revolt the same way they would for a raid in cons. I believe I mentioned that yesterday. So keep that in mind. Don't just like fall into letting your opponent get free value off the revolt cards if you can avoid it. Sometimes it's right to just take the trade anyway, but I would be careful in green-white specifically for a card like this, because it could just ruin you. Like, then it's almost like they just killed your creature for nothing. You just traded it and they got it back, right? Pretty cool card. A couple more to mention here, just 2 more. The first is Shock. This was just spoiled not very long ago at all. And that's literally it. It's Shock. It's 1 red instant, deal 2 damage to target creature or player. And as unexciting as the card is, it's great for limited. Shocks are usually pretty good. And we've seen a lot of 3/2s through this set. We've seen a lot of 2/1s and bears and stuff like that. So Shock is going to do some pretty good work, I think. It's the type of card that, like, you draw it in the late game and you're like, eh. But sometimes it's enough to kill an opponent off. Sometimes it just kills a creature. And being 1 mana means it almost always trades up on value. So you're going to kill like a 2-drop or a 3-drop with it, which is pretty sweet. And if you have to use it plus block with a creature and 2 for 1 yourself, like, you're probably putting that to good use. So Shock, fine card, right? And then moving on, we have one I'm a little skeptical about. I just read it, so I haven't had a lot of time to think about it. But Indomitable Creativity is X and triple red for a mythic sorcery. Destroy X target creatures and or creatures. Destroy X target artifacts and or creatures. For each permanent destroyed this way, its controller reveals cards from the top of his or her library until an artifact or creature is revealed and exiles that card. Those players put the exiled cards on the battlefield, then shuffle their library. So this is shorthand for saying polymorph, essentially. Polymorph means you remove a creature and then you just dig off the top until you hit another creature. It works with the artifacts too, and it doesn't matter. It's not necessarily exchanging artifacts for artifacts or creatures for creatures. It's just any combination. Now, the interesting thing here is that it doesn't specify whose creatures are artifacts. You can destroy your own stuff. You can destroy your opponent's stuff. So this is very much like a polymorph card, where you're either destroying your opponent's good stuff and hoping that they hit stuff that's a little bit worse, or you're destroying like your small stuff, like your servo tokens or your I don't know, puzzle knots and things you don't really need anymore, and you're hoping to hit bigger things off of it. So there's a lot of potential here, and it's very, very flexible. It can be used as a removal spell, but not a very reliable one, because your opponent is going to replace their card with something else. Could be something worse, could be something better. Which is kind of the risk you run with these sorts of cards, especially at sorcery speed. If you're doing this to your cards and your opponent's cards, you got to keep in mind your opponent's cards are the ones that are going to be able to untap and attack first. So there's a lot of risk here, but I think the best way to abuse this card is to put it in a red-based token deck, where you can destroy a bunch of your own tokens and just polymorph them into really big creatures or something like that. Problem is, it's a mythic, so it's going to be hard to evaluate it, knowing that it won't come up in games very often, and B, it is triple red and an X spell, so there's a lot of restrictions there, but a really neat card nonetheless, and something that I'm sure I will see come up outside of limited play, but the purposes of these videos, I'm evaluating for a limited play. But anyway, hopefully this video goes through and the recording doesn't get messed up this time, because that would be a shame. But if you're here and you check through everything, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your night or day to look through these cards with me, and I would really love to hear your opinion about them too. So feel free to comment, like and subscribe, and then comment. That's the best way to do it. And I'd love to hear from you guys. But yeah, lots of really cool stuff going on. Very excited. I think this set is going to be super synergistic and a blast to play from what I've seen so far. So tune in, and hopefully we'll get a big pile of spoilers tomorrow that I can record for. And as always, my name is Timothy, and I'll see you all next time.